Good morning. It's my distinct honor to be here today to present the executive budget for the 2021 and 2023 biennium during these historic times. I want to welcome all those who are joining us both in person and virtually. Of course, members of the 67th Legislative Assembly, a special welcome to those of you that are present here in the House chamber, and also to all those present in the hall across in the Senate. I'd also like to welcome the Justice of the Supreme Court, and of course, he's got my back up here, Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford, all the elected officials, statewide elected officials, cabinet leaders, state team members, and fellow North Dakotans, and of course, North Dakota's First Lady, Catherine Helgis Burgum. First and foremost, I think on behalf of all of us that are here today, we want to give a shout out to a special set of North Dakotans. So let us lead with gratitude to the frontline healthcare workers and the first responders who continue to amaze us every day with their awe-inspiring dedication and their devotion to those suffering from this cruel virus. From the nurses fighting through fatigue to care for their patients, to CNAs filling extra shifts at nursing homes, to our state team members who are working tirelessly at the state lab to process record test results, to the local public health teams, the National Guard members who are collecting samples in every corner of our state, and ambulance crews rushing patients, sometimes from their hometown and they even know who they are, to the emergency room as they fight for every breath, to the police and firefighters and the North Dakota Highway Patrol, North Dakota's finest, who keep our communities safe from danger. We share our deepest gratitude for your exceptional service. Thank you for joining me in acknowledging these everyday heroes who work to save the lives of their fellow North Dakotans. We also want to thank the frontline team members of Team North Dakota who continue to deliver on our administration's purpose. We describe that in 6 simple words: empower people, improve lives, and inspire success. A purpose that has come this year to not only include improving lives, but actually saving lives and livelihoods during this pandemic. And of course, we're grateful for all of our state legislators who continue to work through the logistical challenges so that you can fill your important responsibilities. As the executive branch, we have a constitutional and statutory duty to deliver a budget and recommended legislation to this body, and we're honored to be here today to do that. We deeply appreciate the leadership of OMB Director Joe Morissette and his small but mighty band of analysts in the OMB Management Budget Office. They had an extra challenging time this year because we were dealing with trying to distribute $125 billion of CRF funds. At the same time, we were dealing with the disruption of government. At the same time, we were dealing with an economic collapse. At the same time, we were working to do even a normally challenging budget process. So thank you to all of them and others that pushed through this, our cabinet leaders and their fiscal teams, the governor's office policy team. Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford's been key on this budget. Our statewide elected officials and their teams, all the state agencies and their steady work to prepare this budget, even as the pandemic created disruptions and uncertainties like never before. But even with all these uncertainties, our comprehensive strategic planning and budgeting process reflects our belief that strategy should drive budgets, not budgets driving strategy. Budgets are simply inputs. No farmer ever boasted to a neighbor about the fact that he or she spent more money on seed, fertilizer, and chemicals. But rightly so, that same farmer might have engaged in some friendly coffee shop talk about who produced the most bushels at the end of the year. That is, they were proud and should be about who had the best outcomes. State government must keep shifting its focus to measurable outputs and outcomes, and we shouldn't let the budget process get dragged in to who has the most inputs. As we continue to navigate these dual public health and global economic crises and the extraordinary economic response measures that we have taken, we must look beyond the pressures and the emotions of today and look towards the future and towards tomorrow. Our post-pandemic future will present opportunities in North Dakota for robust economic growth, just as the United States experienced the Roaring 20s following the 1918 flu pandemic. New challenges create opportunities and demand fresh ideas and approaches. And our proposed budget charts a course for North Dakota agencies and institutions to overcome these present day challenges and emerge stronger than ever before. We can accomplish this with a fiscally conservative budget that holds the line on general fund spending, invests in our priority, and maintains healthy reserves, all of this without raising taxes. This budget also preserves the measures that have created over $10.2 billion of permanent tax relief that's been provided by the legislature to our citizens over the last decade, including nearly $550 million in permanent tax relief from the state assuming the funding of county social services starting in 2017 and continuing in this budget through 2023. And very importantly, in this budget for 21-23, we include 0 legacy fund earnings. Those earnings will be available at the end of 21-23, and we're not including them to fill out the 21-23 budget. We will have an opportunity to spend some money on the 21-23 instead we'll be utilizing a portion of legacy fund earnings to catalyze a major bonding package to make critical investments in our state's future. The legacy fund was not created to support day-to-day government operations. It's not what the citizens had in mind, and we must resist the temptation to make that a common practice. When the pandemic reached North Dakota last March, our agencies found ways to limit state spending and utilize federal funds wherever allowed. These efforts will help deliver a positive ending balance next June of $312 million. That's 7 times larger than what was originally projected for 2019 and 2021. That's going to help us get a good start on the next session. In addition, by keeping our economy open and driving 54% of the $1.25 billion in coronavirus relief funds towards economic support for individuals and businesses, North Dakota is in a strong position. General fund revenues are still running 2% ahead of forecast at the end of October, just over a month ago. That's 2/3 the way through the biennium, and I'm sure a few states can say that. And our unemployment rate has been among the lowest in the nation. Working together and without raising taxes, we can deliver a fiscally conservative 21-23 budget that funds our priorities, unleashes the financial power of our strong balance sheet to build critical infrastructure, and provides all North Dakotans with the level of service that they deserve and expect. We're truly blessed to live in a state so richly endowed with natural resources. Our abundant and diverse minerals, our incredibly productive soil, our enormous amounts of clean, fresh water, and even our famous prairie winds, all are assets that support our leading industries of agriculture and energy. However, many of these natural resources are commodities that are vulnerable to volatile global price swings beyond our control, creating challenging ups and downs for our economy. After getting hit with a double whammy of collapsing ag and energy prices in 2015 and 16, we slowly recovered, and with your work, we rebuilt our rainy day fund to a record high. Things were looking up as we were heading into the current biennium starting in July of 19. General fund revenues for the first 6 months, or the last half of 19, were running 7% or $102 million ahead of forecast. Sales tax collections, which typically account for over 40% of general fund revenues at that time, in December of 19, were 10% ahead of forecast. And then last January, the COVID-19 pandemic began to throw the global economy into a tailspin. It crushed demand for oil, triggering an oil price war that sent prices crashing to such a low point that oil futures, for the first time since they began in 1983, actually fell below $0 a barrel. The pandemic dealt a major blow to the global economy, and including here in North Dakota. Our state's real domestic product plummeted 27.6% between the first and second quarters of the year. Although we can take small comfort that this was the 6th smallest decrease in the nation, it was a devastating drop nonetheless, as thousands were suddenly out of work and businesses large and small fought to stay afloat. When oil prices, well, they've partially recovered, the impact to oil tax revenues is significant. For the current biennium, North Dakota is now projected to collect about $3.36 billion in oil tax revenue. As you can see on the chart, That's nearly $1.5 billion, or 30% less than that was forecasted in May of 2019. Oil tax revenues are projected to drop slightly more to below $3 billion in the next biennium. When looking at the four major sales tax types, sales tax, individual income, corporate income tax, and motor vehicle excise tax, we're projecting to collect $135 million less this biennium than last biennium. And it's projected that revenues will be even lower next biennium by another $34 million. As you look at this chart and you see the towering tax collections that occurred during the oil boom at the beginning of the last decade, and you can see how it's flattened out across the time frame till now, this requires all of us to take a hard look at decisions that were made earlier in the decade. We took on some expenditures during the oil boom when general fund revenues from the four major tax types were $800 million to $1.3 billion higher than they are now. Together, the legislature and the executive branch must challenge our existing institutions, our political subdivisions, and ourselves to rethink our approaches in this post-pandemic world. We also know that during this emergency, both health and economic, when our citizens may be struggling physically, emotionally, and economically, it's important that we maintain essential government services. Thankfully, we worked with the legislature last session to make sure that our rainy day fund, the budget stabilization fund, would be fully replenished during the current budget cycle, and it has been. The fund's current maximum balance is $727 million, having been capped at 15% by law of the general fund appropriations for the past two budget cycles. Prior to that, the fund was capped at 9.5% of general fund appropriations. We're proposing in this budget that we return to a 10% cap after a one-time transfer of $240 million from the budget stabilization fund to the general fund to help balance the budget for 2021-23. So this is the second leg on the stool. The first leg is the over $300 million of strong ending balance. The second, filling a gap with a transfer from the rainy day fund. But by capping the rainy day fund at 10%, that should be enough to withstand any future shortfalls. In order to access the balance of the rainy day fund, as all of you know, it requires an across-the-board budget reduction or allotment of 6%, and that's required in law. So with a 10% cap, the state could absorb a 16% reduction in general fund revenues, or about $774 million. Given that the budget stabilization fund is held in reserve in short-term liquid, low-returning assets at low interest, anything more than 10% would also be an underutilization of the state resources. Today, again, we propose, as we did 2 years ago, being more transparent about how oil tax revenue is used to directly support general fund revenues. You'll see on the chart the oil tax revenue usage in the general fund going back for the past 6 bienniums. Oil tax revenues to the general fund were set at $400 million this biennium and last biennium. We propose raising that cap to at least $500 million to better balance ongoing revenue with ongoing spending. Combined with an additional $400 million in oil tax revenues from the Strategic Investment and Improvements Fund, the total tax revenue in our budget to the general fund next biennium would be $900 million. This represents 20% of the general fund from oil tax allocations, which lowers our dependence. It would be down from the 24% that we utilized in the current biennium. Despite disruptions from the pandemic, we pressed ahead with our strategic review process again this interim, conducting a comprehensive review of agency budgets to prioritize and optimize the use of taxpayer dollars. The continuation of existing services and programs required an additional $101 million of scarce ongoing general fund resources. You'll see that in the up bar on this puts and takes chart that we're sharing. To fund the increases that reduce our ongoing spending, we identified $322 million of budget reductions and funding source changes during our strategic planning and budgeting process. Once we had removed those 322, this allowed for us to work with agencies to prioritize requests. We added back $104 million to be redirected towards new priorities things with high return on investment for taxpayers. This, along with a $36 million for state team member salary and benefit changes, that's half of the $72 million that we're proposing. But this $36 million comes from the general fund. The other $36 million for salary and benefit comes from other funds, and $20 million in other changes. That led us to an overall reduction of $61 million in ongoing general fund spending. Overall, when we add back some first-time spending or some one-time spending, general fund expenditures in this budget decreased slightly by about $8 million, excuse me, to $4.8 billion. I just want to say again to all those that worked on the budget, at a time when anytime you're just managing existing operations going forward, the general fund budget will grow and grow and grow. To produce a budget that actually is slightly lower than last time requires enormous work, and I want to thank everybody for getting us to this position today. The executive budget proposes a total of $15 billion from all three of the sources, general, federal, and special funds. And that includes $550 million of proposed appropriations for infrastructure projects as part of a $1.25 billion bonding packages. When we look at the right side of that chart broken down, the expenditure side, overall the expenditures are $3.3 billion. Three of those 3.3 will support the Team North Dakota through salary and benefit investments. 2.6 billion will fund operating expenses, 7.3 distributed through formulas and grants in areas such as K-12 and higher education, Medicaid, and then essential infrastructure directly benefiting citizens and political subdivisions. The remaining 1.7 allows for significant and game-changing long-term investments in capital assets across our state. When we take a look at that entire $15 billion, nearly 67% of the $15 billion, or 2/3 of it, consider it $10 billion, goes to support health and human services and education. And within the general fund, that number is even higher because within the general fund, 82% is consumed by education and health and human services. One of the ways that we can help save taxpayers money and improve services is to do the thing that every industry in America has been doing the last 20 years, and that's investing in technology that improves services to citizens. This has to remain a top priority. In addition, we have the important duty to protect the sensitive data that citizens entrust to government agencies, and that's one of our highest responsibility. This budget invests nearly $105 million in information technology projects, and a lot of that is deferred maintenance, if you will. This includes funding for 15 projects spread across 7 agencies, dealing with a variety of systems and data, from procurement to juvenile case management to traffic data and analysis. This budget moves forward on some long overdue projects that replace or upgrade systems that rely on antiquated, and I must say ancient, mainframe technology. 3 examples on the slide. The current unemployment insurance mainframe has been miraculously patched together during this pandemic at considerable cost to get us through the surge. But the 1980s technology is beyond end of life. It's almost impossible to manage. Another aged system that's critical to deliver of essential services is the Comprehensive Child Welfare Information and Payment System in the Department of Human Services. This payment processing system for foster care and adoption families, if it failed, it would impact over 2,400 North Dakota families. And lastly, in DOT, our third mainframe, replacing the DOT's long outdated roadway information management system would reduce manual tasks and paper handling and data reentry, while improving accuracy in forms and reports and tests to better serve the public. We've kicked this IT can down the road for decades. There's not much can left to kick, and we've run out of road. I was reading Ed Schaefer's December of 2000, 20 years ago. Ed Schaefer was talking about replacing some of these systems and about the importance of getting on the internet. Ed had it right then, and I could about lift that paragraph and put it in now. The perpetual deferment that we've had on these 30 to 40-year-old systems increases both cost and risk to the state and our citizens. We must act now to protect citizens and their information. This budget increases, or not, doesn't increase, it decreases, but it authorizes 15,779 FTEs. That's a decrease of 91 FTEs from the current biennium. And it includes a proposed performance-based, not across the board, salary increases of 2% in each of the year of the biennium. The cost of the salary increases, as I mentioned before, is about $72 million for the biennium, and $36 million of that coming from the general fund. Agencies may provide additional salary increases based on performance if they can identify long-term salary savings through further FTE reductions, which will incentivize efficiency and innovation. We need to look to a future where we've got fewer state employees, but those that are here are compensated in a way where we can attract talent and compete with the private sector. We propose continuing the state's excellent health insurance benefits package with no changes to deductibles or coinsurance, and thankfully, bucking a trend in the last decade, health insurance premiums are only increasing 0.1%, or $760,000 for the biennium. We almost must ensure that we can live up to the promises we've made to our dedicated state team members. The unfunded liability of the pension fund, now estimated at $1.6 billion, jeopardizes our ability to cover the state's obligations to retired team members and current members. Having this unfunded liability also negatively affects local bond ratings, which are tied to the state bond rating, and increases borrowing costs at all levels of government. We acknowledge that given our current tight revenue situation, there are not resources available this biennium to make a large cash infusion into the pension fund to close the unfunded liability gap. However, we can slowly chip away at it by increasing both the state and the team member contributions to the retirement fund by 1%, at a cost to the state of about $9.4 million next biennium. This important proposal will put the pension fund on a path towards solvency by 2065. And on the chart you're looking at, you can see if we do nothing, the lines never cross. With this small change, the red line moves to intersect at the point where we've achieved solvency by 2065. This proposal received a favorable recommendation from the Interim Employee Benefits Programs Committee, and we thank them for their work. The state needs to fund its commitment, and state team members have a personal interest in ensuring the pension fund remains solvent. This is a shared responsibility. So along with the increased state contribution, the 1% additional contribution by team members will benefit the future retirement, their future retirement, by growing the pension fund, which will increase earnings to help ensure the fund delivers on its commitment to Team ND long-term in the future. Children are the future of our state, and education is the key to their success and North Dakota's prosperity in the decades ahead. Throughout the pandemic, we've been able to provide significant support for our K-12 schools and higher education. Of the COVID relief dollars provided to the state through various elements of the CARES Act, nearly $200 million has been provided to both public and private school districts and higher education institutions, with the important goal of keeping our students learning in their classrooms. Let's take a moment right now to thank all the teachers, administrators, staff, school board members across the state who are fighting to keep our kids learning and our educators safe. Last session, we worked together to increase the K-12 per pupil payment by 2% in each year of this biennium, putting it over $10,000 per pupil for the first time in state history. Under the current projections, we would not have enough money to just through the general fund maintain that ongoing level of payment. Therefore, this executive budget proposes a one-time transfer of $83 million from the Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund to maintain the per pupil payment at the current level of $10,036. The Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund was created for just this purpose, and it has been used by this body to support school aid for the past 3 biennia. And even with our proposed transfer of $83 million, the fund will still maintain its very healthy and constitutionally required balance of 15% of the most recent general fund appropriation for state aid in school districts. So even with the transfer, The foundation aid will stay at its maximum level, which is hundreds of millions of dollars, securing the future for schools. But still, this one-time transfer should serve as a notice to school districts that they need to continue to plan their budgets accordingly going forward, because if we saw increased pressure in the 23-25, it's possible we would not be able to maintain this very high level of pure pupil payment at this level beyond next biennium. But again, thankfully, we've got the Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund to help us with that. To be clear, our state's commitment to K-12 education has never been stronger. When we take a look at the entire general fund, the circle on that chart is the proposed about $4.8 billion general fund. 38% of that is providing ongoing revenue to K-12 school aid. That's up from 33% in 23 and 15. And when we take a look at higher ed in the same way, using the same comparison, higher ed under our proposal will be at 13% of the general fund compared to 11% back in 23-15. And combined, those two equals 51% of the general fund. So again, let us say again, our commitment to education in North Dakota has never been higher. But when we take a look at the total funding for higher education next biennium at 2.6%, or 2.6 billion, that includes a general fund decrease of 9.3 million from the current biennium legislative base level. This reflects this trend that we're seeing of decreasing enrollment, and it also reflects that in our budget we've got a 7.5% reduction in the formula payment rate for higher education. Prior to the pandemic, we spoke repeatedly about higher education was challenged by forces, unstoppable forces of technology and economics and demographics and culture. The pandemic has only accelerated these changes, and our institutions must continue to find ways to adapt, to innovate, and become more efficient, to remain successful in a world of education that's increasingly competitive and offers many alternatives. Let me just say the difference between K-12 and higher ed. K-12, our formula is based on students. Those students live within a district, and there's not much a district can do to change the birth rate within their district. In higher education today, you don't just serve 18 to 22-year-olds. We have an opportunity with certificate programs for people for training. We've got people that are retired taking master classes, older adults returning to complete their degrees. The market opportunity in an online world for an institution goes far beyond the 18 to 22-year-olds that live within driving distance of that campus. And we've got a massive investment in 11 campuses. We're a Barnes & Noble model in an Amazon world, and we need to take a hard look at how we innovate to stay competitive in higher education. Our budget also includes $45 million for workforce development through matching grants to expand and establish new centers for career and technical education. This is critically important to our state and our workforce. Since we proposed this idea 2 years ago, the need for career academies has only grown, and the concept continues to gain in popularity and in support. There's a shining example right here with the Bismarck Career Academy, which involves the private sector, Bismarck Public Schools, and Bismarck State College. Dickinson, Watford City, and Cass County have all made progress, fundraising progress, and taking real action steps towards building out career academy efforts. We need to give those local efforts a boost and help them gain traction. We've got to move forward faster to support our workforce, our economy, and most importantly, our youth. And so this budget includes $45 million of one-to-one matching grants for career and technical academies. In this budget, we also propose increasing funding for the Higher Education Challenge Grant Program from $9.4 million to $20 million. That's $10 million from the general fund and $10 million from potential June 30th, 2021 legacy fund earnings. By requiring a 2-to-1 match on the private donations on those challenge grants, we can turn $20 million invested by the state into $60 million for our higher education system. Continuing our commitment to engage and work with our tribal partners, we have once again included funding to provide grants to our tribal community colleges across the state. They're an important part of our education system, and this $1 million education grant will support the 5 tribal colleges in educating and training North Dakota workforce. This year has challenged our health care system and our state health department like never before. We've used our share of Federal CARES Act funding thoughtfully and responsibly to support our state response to the pandemic. And we recognize the importance of continuing these efforts through the upcoming months until an effective vaccine becomes widely available. The executive budget reflects and supports the need for the health department to maintain a pandemic response potentially into the first parts of the 21-23 biennium. We've proposed $95 million in COVID-related funding, of which $84 million is one-time funding, and it includes $40 million in known federal and special funds. There's nothing in here that would include the possibility of a fourth stimulus bill coming yet this year from Congress, which could provide some relief to the numbers I've just described. But as a state, we're very fortunate to have access to quality health care, thanks in part to investments made by this Assembly. Each of us has a responsibility to ensure that those investments are used to support all citizens equitably. Medicaid, as you know, provides much needed health care to tens of thousands of low-income North Dakotans. Children, pregnant women, older adults, and individuals with developmental disabilities all receive health care from the Medicaid program. Additionally, North Dakota adopted Medicaid expansion, and it covers 22,500 low-income, and yet they don't fall into the other categories. These are adult-aged, able-bodied individuals, people without disabilities, and it assists them in receiving the health care services they need. However, just because as a state, we undertook some years ago Medicaid expansion, which this administration supports, along with 37 other states, it does not mean that we should reimburse our providers far more for each Medicaid expansion client than any other state. Today, North Dakota reimburses providers about $14,000 for each Medicaid expansion client. Alaska, the next highest state, reimburses providers at $9,000, and they've got a lot of air ambulance dollars in that number. Minnesota is at $8,600, Montana at $7,000, half of what North Dakota reimburses providers for the same services. And our reimbursement rate to healthcare providers is unsustainable, it's unaffordable, and even most concerning is we'll reimburse providers the most in the United States for Medicaid expansion clients. Those that are able to work reimburse our same providers about 75% less for care that's delivered to regular Medicaid clients, such as, again, children, seniors, and individuals with disabilities, the very populations whom Medicaid program was created. To resolve this inequity and to bring us in line with other states, we are renewing our proposals to streamline administration of Medicaid expansion and reduce the expansion fee schedule back to traditional Medicaid rates versus the substantially higher, 75% higher commercial rates. This change would become in effect in July 1 of 2022, allowing our health systems time for the transition and to take place after the pandemic and related stresses on the healthcare system had passed. These changes would have no impact on any individual's eligibility or access or quality of their services. This is about payments to providers. Next up, after the last 8 months fighting COVID, it's become more clear than ever that we must keep innovating on how to best care for our elderly and our most vulnerable citizens. We must continue to provide safe, affordable alternatives so that as more individuals and families decide that they want their loved ones cared for at home, we've got the providers trained and ready to take care of them. This executive budget builds on prior reinvestments that shifted dollars from institutional care to expanding home and community-based care. And this is a business opportunity for our care facilities to expand their lines of business to include home and community-based care. We know that sometimes seniors choose to be in nursing homes or their families feel nursing homes are the best place for them. But when they're in that system, our current payment system can penalize nursing facilities based on its pure cost-based methodology. When a nursing home facility operates more efficiently and they reduce their costs, their payment rates go down the next year. This is a perverse incentive and does not make any sense. To fix these disincentives, we have included funds in the budget to change the payment system to reward operational efficiency versus penalize it, and to help people have well-maintained properties. Behavioral health has been key to our administration, and our strategic initiative on behavioral health continues to drive progress on treatment and recovery in North Dakota. First Lady Catherine, through her personal courage to share her own lived experience with addiction, continues to inspire others to celebrate the power and hope of recovery and eliminate the shame and stigma of the disease of addiction. Please join me in thanking First Lady Catherine Helgas for her inspirational example. To expand access to treatment services, the executive budget increases funding from $8 million to $17 million for the substance use disorder voucher program through the Department of Human Services. The SUD program is a great program, so great that it exhausted its entire appropriation in just 14 months this biennium. Our budget proposal matches the funding to the increased demand for the program. We also propose construction of a new state hospital in Jamestown. This proposal utilizes existing authority in state law to enter into a public-private partnership. A private entity would build and maintain the hospital through a 40-year agreement. DHS would realize savings and efficiencies of about $5.5 million per year, which would help offset the cost of the facility, leaving a gap payment of approximately $1.7 million per year for debt service on the new hospital starting in the 23-25 biennium. Every day, 440,000 vehicles travel on our state highways, and each year, tens of billions of dollars of goods are shipped to and from and through North Dakota by truck. Our agriculture industry, our energy sector, and our communities expect us to maintain bridges and road systems that we have built over generations. Investing in bridge maintenance or replacement of state and local roads will reduce the need for cumbersome load restrictions, and it'll provide support for both farmers and energy producers throughout North Dakota. To accomplish this in the executive budget, we propose a powerful financial model that utilizes a predictable portion of legacy fund earnings to build infrastructure now for North Dakota's future. For decades, North Dakota has harnessed the power of bonding with successful programs at the Housing Finance Agency, the Public Finance Agency, and other agencies, including higher education, the Building Authority, and the State Water Commission. Since 1982, the Housing Finance Agency alone has completed over 116 separate bond issues totaling $5.5 billion. Currently, state agencies hold a modest balance of $2.25 billion in bonds, and with our extremely strong balance sheet, we're able to do far more. Interest rates today are at historic, decades-long lows. 2 days ago, our very own North Dakota Housing Finance Agency completed a $125 million bond issuance at 1.9% yield. We've got municipalities in the state who've done 10 to 15-year bonds at numbers below 1%. Now is the time for us to invest in our future with a backbone of smart, efficient, modern infrastructure. We can save tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars for our state and political subdivisions over time versus waiting years and years to pay cash for infrastructure. And by creating an additional flexible financial vehicle with some of our strategic high dollar infrastructure projects, we can create budget room in our DOT budget and our Resources Trust Fund to support many other smaller yet essential water and road projects in every corner of the state. Bonding isn't new to North Dakota. The bonding we have done has been focused mainly on clean water projects and public housing, not for transportation infrastructure, as nearly every state uses it. For example, 3 years ago, the conservative Republican Utah legislature approved a bill allowing for $1 billion in bonding over 4 years to accelerate transportation projects in their state. And today, Utah has one of the fastest growing economies in the nation. Under our proposal, the state would sell bonds, legacy bonds, in an amount totaling $1.25 billion. The proceeds from that bond sale would be used to invest in infrastructure projects and to create a perpetual revolving loan fund. The infrastructure projects would help grow and expand our economy and provide a return on investment that far exceeds the very low cost of borrowing money today. Thanks to the foresight of our citizens over 10 years ago, we've got a unique opportunity to leverage the earnings of the legacy fund and create lasting value for North Dakota. With these stable and predictable legacy fund earnings as an assured source of repayment, the interest rates on North Dakota legacy bonds in today's environment will be extremely low. Communities in our economy will benefit as the infrastructure projects can move forward now. The permanent revolving loan fund that we're proposing will offer low interest loans to cities and other political subdivisions who will repay monies back into the revolving funds, creating a permanent legacy asset for future generations. Waiting to build major infrastructure projects until we can pay cash defers the economic benefits, exposes us to future construction inflation, it raises the local cost share, and it limits our growth. Bonding works. Our school districts do it, our cities do it, and they do it regularly. It's simple, and most importantly, in today's interest rate environment, it's very smart and very economical. Let's take a look at how our bonding package breaks down. We propose $700 million to capitalize the infrastructure revolving loan fund to be loaned out to political subdivisions for water, road, bridge, and other projects under long-term, low-interest loans, which will help keep local property taxes low. The best part, the funding mechanism is revolving and it's perpetual. It's a permanent gift to future generations of North Dakota. We also propose $323 million for grants that can be used to aid and match federal dollars for transportation, bridge, and community projects, where we can see immediate improvements in our communities and roadways. These infrastructure funds can be multiplied with federal DOT grants and other sources. As I shared earlier, we also propose $45 million cost-sharing grant to incentivize one-to-one the expansion and opening of local career academies. These academies will be built around partnerships with local school districts and our institutions of higher education to enhance career and workforce development. Finally, we propose $182 million for state facilities. We need to maintain and protect the state's significant investment in our capital assets by addressing maintenance and repair issues that have gone unaddressed for far too long. We must make improvements so we can better utilize our existing space and lower our facility costs over time. One thing we learned during COVID is we don't need more space, but we need to take care of the space that we have. There's $131 million for maintenance and repair projects identified as the most critical on a 5-point scale as a result of the statewide real estate assessment, which was authorized by the 2019 legislature. Also included in this is $19 million for the higher education Tier 2 and Tier 3 infrastructure projects, which the legislature has supported in the past. There's $14 million for the completion of the NDSU industry-facing agricultural development center to help close the gap to get that off the ground and help our ag industry. There's $10 million for state parks infrastructure and nearly $7 million to make the Capitol complex more accessible to all citizens, more useful for our legislators, and have better space utilization by state agencies. We're in a good starting spot. Interest rates are low, and now is the time to make use of this standard financing tool, bonding. And historically, the state of North Dakota has carried an extremely low amount of debt compared to other states. And recent figures available from Moody's, we're the third lowest in tax-supported debt. We're also the third lowest when looking at tax-supported debt as a percentage of income. As a matter of fact, is at $131 dollars per North Dakotan compared to national average of $14.93. We're less than 1/10 the national average, and many states don't have the strength of our bonding, the balance sheet that we do, nor do they have an assured form of repayment like the legacy fund earnings, nor do they have a bank in North Dakota. We're in the best position of any state to take the secure, predictable legacy fund earnings that are not dependent on oil prices and leverage that into a multiplier that can help us take care of deferred maintenance and to build out our infrastructure. We're grateful to the legislators' interim legacy fund earnings committee for traveling the state and giving citizens the opportunity to provide input on how legacy fund earnings should be used. We agree with the committee's direction that using a percentage of the market value of the legacy fund earnings is the most prudent way to create a stable distribution of earnings and at the same time protecting the principal and growing the principal. We propose using 4% of a 5-year average market value, and that's the amount that gets distributed on the last day of each biennium. We would take anything above 4% and reinvest that back in principal. Based on a estimated rate of return, the legacy fund's been returning 5.8%. We project that the legacy fund will earn $989 million. That's the earnings only, $989 million during the 21-23 biennium. And under this proposal, nearly $560 million, 4%, would be available to be used at the last day of 2023, so it will be available to be used in the 23-25 biennium. We propose reinvesting the other 40% of earnings back into the fund. That would grow the balance to $8.9 billion. Using the same formula going forward, we would quickly see that fund grow for the future. It would surpass $14.6 billion by 2031, just over a decade ago, and at the same time support over $4.3 billion in legacy investments back to the state during that same decade. The legacy fund is in good hands with our state investment board. Legacy fund earnings and principal should continue to be invested and held under the management of the state investment board until the time that they're allocated. This will ensure that the fund continues to grow and maximum returns for future generations are produced while still supporting worthy projects as decided on by the legislature. We offer 5 criteria for legacy fund projects. It's similar to what we offered 2 years ago. But we want to set the bar high. Again, we're proposing legacy fund earnings are be used for legacy fund projects, not for funding general fund. And we've created a budget that allows us to do that. Criteria 1, have a lasting impact beyond the current generation. Number 2, have a regional, state, and national impact. 3, key, leverage other financial support, whether it's private sector matching grants, whether it's federal matching dollars. But in doing that, we can take every dollar coming out of earnings of the legacy fund and turn it into $2 or $3. They should be one-time projects that don't grow government, and most importantly, they should create a positive impact for our economy, our workforce, and our communities. That's the lens we've taken a look at these categories. And based on what we've learned from the interim committee and discussions across the state, we're proposing 5 themes for high-impact investments of legacy fund earnings. The first, legacy is a stronger economy for all. We propose using 20% of legacy fund earnings to drive economic diversification, community development, and strategic initiatives across the state. In this category, you could envision support for the expansion and development of new businesses and industries, including value-added ag, value-added energy, unmanned aerial systems, biosciences, autonomous technologies, advanced manufacturing, as well as building healthy, vibrant communities. The second legacy that we'd be building is building a future based on research and innovation. We know that the key to supporting industries in our state is around innovation, not regulation. And this would help us invest in innovation. 10% of the legacy earnings would go for research and innovation, both our higher education system and the private sector. These funds should embrace bold ideas that will solve major problems that the world currently faces, such as carbon capture and utilization, the drive for commercialization of products, and the discovery of opportunities for the future, including things like rare earth minerals in North Dakota. The third legacy, improving citizen services. We propose using 10% of legacy earnings to transform how government provides services. We can accelerate a culture of innovation and transformation that promotes efficiency, replaces antiquated brick and mortar in-person approaches and replaces paper-based business processes with state-of-the-art systems that can save our citizens time and their money. The fourth legacy is about bonding repayment fund, the sinking fund, and multiplying legacy earnings. We propose that 40% of legacy earnings create the legacy bond repayment fund. This fund will be used to make the debt payment on the 1.25 billion bonds as previously described. And this would, at the rate that legacy earnings would coming off, these bonds would be quickly paid down and would provide a source of dollars for future legislations, future generations to create if they needed additional bonding needs in the future to help our communities, our school districts, water projects, etc. The last is what we might think about legacy funds, but we've got the ability to do all 5 of these, and these would be true legacy projects. The executive budget proposes investing 20% of legacy funds into transformational legacy projects, driving big picture ideas with high return on investment for our citizens. And there's a lot of appetite for this, and perhaps the legislature's got some great ideas that we can think about for 23 and 25 with 2-to-1 matches, so we can have private sector match dollars come in to great legacy projects for our state. In addition, we propose utilizing these themes and criteria that we are proposing for the future for 23. We propose using them for the realized earnings that are going to be coming available on June 30th in 2021. Some of those dollars on June 30th, 21 have already been appropriated, but there are some dollars that are remaining, and there's the potential that there could even be more dollars based on earnings that come between now and next June. We're proposing that 27 million of those June 30th, 2021 dollars continue the great efforts we're having with UAS and carry on the work from last session by expanding the Beyond Visual Line of Sight statewide network, now called Vantis, and supporting the Grand Sky. In addition, 8 million is proposed to support the Housing Incentive Fund to increase affordable housing across the state. We have 30 million proposed within the Art Research and Innovation theme for the continuation expansion of the Innovation Technology Loan Fund, or LIFT, which has already made great investments that are going to produce high returns. This program, first developed by the 66th Legislative Assembly, has already demonstrated significant return on investment to the growth or relocation of at least 16 companies. There's a second 10 million that will be included to enhance the 2-to-1 Higher Education Challenge Grant program. Our proposal for government transformation includes 25 million for statewide cybersecurity. This will ensure our citizens and state team members are protected from threats both near and far. And within the legacy projects category, we have included 10 million for state park infrastructure upgrades and the establishment of a $10 million state park challenge grant program to drive private investments. We've also included a new concept, much needed, $5 million for environmental quality restoration fund. Think of that as a mini super fund to clean up brownfield sites in North Dakota. In trying times like these, there's a natural tendency to hunker down, to focus on the immediate crisis at hand, and rightfully so. Yet we must not lose sight of the fact that our future extends far beyond the current emergency. We all must remember that this too shall pass. And as it does, we need a North Dakota that is strongly positioned with healthy, vibrant communities, smart, efficient infrastructure that can attract and retrain a talented 21st century workforce. When BusinessInsider.com ranked the 30 best cities in our nation to live in after the pandemic, Fargo and Bismarck were both in the top 10. Grand Forks was ranked 19th. Affirming what we all know, that North Dakota is already a great place to live, work, and play. With a fiscally conservative budget that prioritizes general fund needs without an ongoing reliance on legacy fund earnings, we can set our state on a historic path. Together, we can harness the predictable free cash flow of legacy earnings and multiply its impact through economic diversification, community building, much needed infrastructure, research and innovation, transforming government like no other state, and building remarkable and lasting generational true legacy projects. The pandemic and other events of the past year have taught us all lessons. Lessons in courage, lessons in curiosity, lessons in gratitude, and certainly lessons in humility. And we must all recognize how fortunate we are to be Americans and to hold the opportunity to work hard at work worth doing. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of North Dakotans every single day by working as one, by showing leadership everywhere, bringing a growth mindset to our work, and being citizen focused. To quote international author Lynn Twist, "This is not a time of mere change. This is a time of transformation. And transformation comes not out of scarcity, but it comes out of the context of possibility and responsibility and sufficiency." And with our abundant human and natural resources, the possibilities for North Dakota remain absolutely unlimited. To each and every legislator in the 67th Assembly, thank you for your important service. Serving the citizens of North Dakota is a tremendous honor for all of us, especially in this incredible challenging time in our state's history. Together with OMB and our agency leaders, we all stand ready to work together with you to build a brighter future for all North Dakotans. To the citizens of North Dakota, we know that you'll continue to rise to meet the historic challenges that we're facing. All of us here in government are inspired by our citizens. We're inspired by your passion and your compassion. We're inspired by your perseverance, and we're inspired by your optimism. Thank you. God bless you, the citizens of North Dakota, and may God bless the great state of North Dakota. Thank you very much.
Will the escort committees please come forward and escort the governor and the first lady and the lieutenant governor from the chamber?